So this is the first edition of Anajali event. This is something that Sumaya should be doing, but I've decided that I'm just going to help out for the first edition of the event. Just to welcome you guys again. Today we're going to be talking about technology, what this means for Kenya, the Kenyan tech industry, and we'll be talking with Roina. I won't go too much into your history because you'll tell us that for yourself. Okay. But she's been part of the tech industry for a while, despite our young age. We're actually in Strath together, causing chaos. But I'll let her delve more into that. So just as we start, Roina, maybe you can tell us a bit about your background, how you got into tech, how you got into Strathmore, how that, like your evolution in tech thereafter, going from big corporations to social impact. So just walking us through that.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So where to start? Limo, you've probably had this story like 9 million times, but I mean, my exposure to tech started with my dad. My dad has a history in banking and technology for banking. So while figuring out what course to do after uni, after high school, it was a little bit obvious. It was kind of like something to do with tech, but not exactly computer science, not exactly business and IT. So I ended up doing a diploma in business and IT for like a year and a half. And Strat has a thing where you can transfer your credits. So when your KCSE results come out, you can join like second year after doing the diploma. So while I was doing the diploma, I kind of like sampled a little bit of the computer science side and a little bit of the business side, and I was drawn to the computer science side. So my degree is in computer science, but I didn't finish my degree. I got to like the fourth year, the last semester, and I think, even Limo can attest, there was at that juncture in the tech industry, there was a lot of opportunities for emerging women in tech. There was also a lot of opportunities to participate in community activities that give you like more exposure. So there was a community in Strath called the Google Developer Groups, and the whole point was to just like learn together, start using the technology together, and hopefully gain enough skills to be able to transition into a career in tech. And it was pretty cool that companies like Google were investing like a lot of money in enabling communities in like Kenya and Africa to just like have resources for those types of things. So I think a lot of like the practical skills I got around programming while in uni were less in the classroom and more in the community type setup with, getting to interact with different types of developers, getting to build small MVP projects with new emerging tech like Android and Flutter and all these different stacks. So I think it was great to have had like hands-on experience with the programming from the beginning, like from before joining the job field. So when I got to my fourth year, the last semester, I wasn't doing like really well with the grades. I was just like passing. I was just like bare minimum. Like if the pass mark is 50, I'm like 50.9. Just like skating by, right? So towards the end of that semester, I got the opportunity to go to this event called Google I/O, which is in San Francisco every mid-year or something. And so it was coinciding right at the time I was supposed to do the final exams. And they were like, okay, so are you coming up or not? And I was like, I'm coming. And then I was like, like whatever with the exams. And I mean, I think when I bring up that part of like my history, a lot of people think that I'm advocating for folks not to finish their degrees because the long-term story has ended up really good. But I think there's certain things, at least within the scope of like higher learning, that are extremely significant. I think there's the aspect of learning how to learn that you kind of get used to, at least the memorization bit of things, because you have to memorize a lot of things before the cards. You have to manage having like 5-6 units at any given point, and like really get into the flow of like, how do I learn quickly enough and retain information enough. So you have like a 4-year sprint. You have a whole 4-year stint where you get to need to practice that to survive in a higher learning organization. So I think that was a lot of value on the uni side. But in terms of practical skills, it really takes like a lot more in terms of like what do you do outside the classroom to participate in something tangible. So I think a lot of people, it's so valid to take a lot of time to explore your interests, like on a friendship level, on a who you are type level. But for me, that I took that opportunity to kind of like look at, okay, what can I do outside on a job level? Because I just felt like at that point I've been very career driven. Yeah.
So just to paint a picture of, because I was in school with Roina, just to paint a picture, Roina was the kind of person she was president of the Strathmore University Media Group. She was in the Google developers group. She was literally like running a lot of the extracurricular activities in school. So just when you think about that and then you juxtapose it with the fact that, okay, during the last year of school, she was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I just want you to like, if you can, and sorry to deviate from the script a bit, just walking us through the process of being like, okay, school is here. I can either choose to finish this or I can take a chance of learning about what I'm passionate about outside of the classroom and take a chance on yourself and actually pursue what you want to do for the rest of your life, regardless of school's demands and everything.
I think that's a really good place to actually pause because it's not really an easy decision. Like there's so much pressure around like your parents have invested all this amount of money to get you there. You're actually like exhibiting the signs and symptoms of a very intellectual person. So people are like having expectations of how your career will unfold, then getting that close to the finish line and then just like dropping your boats. Of course, there's like a lot of pressure when you're making that type of decisions. But I think within first year, second year, well, I had a lot of narratives about people saying it's so difficult to get like a meaningful internship. And I told myself, like, if I'm like in a school like Strat and the fee is like that expensive, like they better place me somewhere. And so my idea of what an internship placement process would look like, I thought it was going to be like this bespoke experience where they're like understanding my personality and finding a company that's appropriate. I didn't know that you're just like on your own. Like you go figure out how you're going to get those internship hours. But I think it was something I'd told myself I'd love to have a meaningful internship experience. Like if we're gonna get time off for internship, let it be at least fun to say the least, and let it be something I can gather some transferable skills. So like immediately getting into uni, it was always like, what are people saying are the best internships? And at that point it was like GE, like General Electric used to come and give us all these talks and tell us about like internship and progression plans within their company. And so I kind of had this mindset of like the programs that have the best level of internship experience are the ones that have like money. So I had like from what we were exposed to, it was Unilever, PwC, GE, Deloitte, and you're like, how do I place in those companies? Because they're the ones who seem to have some kind of intentionality about the internship program. And at that point, they were selecting a lot of people through grades. So anyone who is like either making Dean's List, they're definitely in third year. Like Dean's List, like first year, second year, you're probably gonna maybe make it to like one of those types of internships. Like your lecturers will love you, they'll make direct recommendations about you. So I was going down that path first year, second year. And then it just like the narrative started changing. I don't know if you remember that movie, the Intern movie. Remember the Intern movie for Google? And I was like, okay, so there's even more funner things that don't require me to wear like matching pantsuit to have like an opportunity there, and I don't have to be Dean's List. So like that narrative, like for me in second year started changing. I was like, oh, there's fun internships and there's like all these different type of tech companies. Let me increase the scope of thinking. And of course, it ended up being more of those laid-back cultures, like seeing that Google type culture, hearing more narratives about people starting businesses in the back of a garage or like starting businesses in coffee shops. That kind of like ignited for me, the type of things I would think about. So one side, my parents are probably like thinking she's gonna end up going that traditional, very safe route. But the other side of me was like, wow, I mean, it would be cool to be having a meeting in a park, and that's like my work, right? So started getting more and more curious about the Google stuff. And because I started participating like so much, I mean, it was of course on top of school. So it was like you're doing classes till like 4 and then finding opportunities to contribute to some of those communities like after. So I won't discount that there was like a lot of sacrifice there. I won't discount that there was a lot of like extra work to participate in those things. But it started paying off very early for me, especially like being a woman in tech, right? It was like, okay, people who are organizing this company, this community things predominantly male. A lot of investments around making sure there is more representation of women. So kind of rode that wave, but it paid off for me very early. So meeting the person where I did my internship, I met the person who offered me the internship at one of the events I organized. And like that was like I had like options because there was multiple people who are coming to the event to try and learn about Android, and I'm the facilitator, and they're like, hey, do you want to do like a paid internship? So that's the first time it started kind of like fleshing out like, oh, all right, there's something valuable in here. So by the time I got to fourth year, I think I'd done like actual paid jobs from community. Like I had gotten like opportunities to travel out of the country to speak at conferences, and I wasn't getting a lot of feedback from like the careers office on like places I wanted to apply. I didn't get a lot of like reinforcement about like, yeah, you'll for sure have a job after you leave. And this side, like the side for community, those assurances were there. So it was kind of an easy jump because it was like, all right, I can really go for this conference and meet a couple of interesting people and come back home with a job after being in San Francisco. But it was also a risk because you never really know how your skills as a community built developer slash student from Africa, is that gonna stick in an environment like San Francisco, you know? So it was a deep end type of thing. Like honestly, there was a lot of winging it, but there was a little bit of calculation in terms of like, if I do it right, it can actually work out.
So it seems like your risk actually kind of led you down the path to Sandy, Microsoft, Food for Education.
Yeah.
How was your experience? For example, like, because through your history, you've dealt with Sandy and Microsoft, which are, okay, let me pick Microsoft, for example. That's a large corporation, right? And then you have Food for Education, which is more of a social impact organization.
Yeah.
So having experience in both kind of like a commercial corporate culture, like a big multinational organization, and then moving on to a social impact a kind of organization, what would you say are like the key differences, especially when it comes to how they approach impacts and innovation, especially those two aspects?
Right. So I think it's good to mention like my perspective is gonna be informed a lot by like my own individual path within like my career, right? So I think when I'm looking at like my role, I kind of like have this expectation of like where my career should be at a given point. So even when I'm identifying opportunities, I kind of have this kind of metric that I use in my mind to see whether an opportunity will make sense to me or not. I think stumbling into an environment like Sandy, which was very fast-paced startup, it's where a lot of startups are right now, right? Like there's doors that are currently open for folks to raise a ton of money, which means there's a lot of opportunities for these companies to hire. And that type of culture demands that you kind of like build your own path, right? Like if you're a go with the flow type person who hopes that there will be eventually a very clearly laid out path on how your career is going to progress in that company, that's probably like a sink or swim type situation. So the think is that you could end up being one of those people who've been in that type of startup for 7-8 years, right? Which means that you can, it's a great environment to build the domain knowledge. It's just going to take a lot longer because you are also being affected and impacted by how rapidly evolving the company is. So the swim is to ride the wave of how rapidly evolving that company is and find opportunities to gain very specific skill sets, right? So there's like a sprint where people are trying to do a lot of fundraising. Being involved in like a fundraising cycle doesn't allow you to really understand the ins and outs of fundraising, but being a part of that process allows you to look at some of the factors that affect how investors invest in this company, right? And this is not dictated by your role. So it's not like only business development people are going to have those types of experiences. The good thing with a startup, these opportunities open up so quickly and they go so quickly. So it's just more about like how much organizational knowledge do you have, how on point do you remain with how rapidly things are moving in the ecosystem and in your company. And it kind of sets you up also to be comfortable in like a Microsoft type setting, which the decisions are like way above you. So it just boils down to curiosity on how much you know about the company. Like the company will run, you'll be able to perform your job like somewhere like Microsoft, you'll be able to perform your job with not like without knowing all the politics that's going on or who's the new who and who's the new who. But when you've come from a startup environment, you realize that paying attention to that type of stuff that happens outside your team can really open you up to having a lot of like different opportunities. It gives you some foresight, like you're able to jump ship when it's time to jump ship. You're able to see, all right, like we're on rough waters, here's how I survived the job. And having interacted with like colleagues of mine who've either been like in an Oracle and then moved to a Microsoft, or worked at Boeing and moved to Microsoft, like that's something that I typically see people who haven't been exposed to startup struggle with. Startups toughen you up to realize that the factors that affect your performance and your existence in that company are not solely based off, they're not in your control. Like you could be the most on time, finish all the to-do lists, get everything printed, file, documented, but that does not always equal your success in a startup. And I know you would agree with that, right? So it's a lot of like exercising the relationship building muscle and the curiosity muscle, and the growth mindset in the startup scene. And it's a valuable skill to have when now you're transitioning to the big companies. The joys about the big company like Microsoft is they have resources. And by resources, I don't just mean money. I mean that there's a lot of people, which means that a lot of people can focus on very small parts of things. So if you find a HR company, like if you find a HR department at like Microsoft, there's someone who's specifically focused on like how we communicate as a company. There's someone who's specifically focused on conflict resolution, which means that there's very few cases where you'll find they haven't thought of something. There'll be a lot of resources kind of like pulled into making sure that like the very fine bits are sorted. And also learning resources. Like I've not seen any kind of like startup that's able to like document a culture, document policies. That takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of people to do that type of stuff. So it's a great environment where like it's nice and structured. It's very nice and neat. But success in that type of environment is also different. Like success there is it means that the rules are so clearly defined that the starting field is very blurred. So for you starting as like a junior PM, as much as there's a very clearly defined path by HR on how you can end up even all the way to like a vice president of product there, it's how much you do outside those lines that really matters, which you kind of bring in the community vibe also, like the having developing during uni the psychology of doing more than what your coursework stipulates. It applies very well so in the Microsoft type setup, because success really there is like, yes, I'm exemplary at what's in my JD, but I'm exemplary at like 5 other things. And because you're in a setup where you are, your colleague or the person you're working with is an ex MIT, ex Stanford, ex Penn University. Like there's like a mid-level PM who was in my team, who not like a principal PM who was in my team, who was part of the people who developed the HTTPS protocol. Like he's in the board that decides what the next version of the protocols that govern the internet are, and that's like just something he does on the side, right? Like, so those are your colleagues. So it kind of, there's two ways to look at that situation. It's the imposter syndrome is there in the background of like, wow, I don't even have a degree. Why am I here? And like, I'm discussing it with these guys. Why are they listening to me? Like, I don't know what I'm talking about. Because like this guy has the experience, right? They have the credentials. So you get into that setup where it's like the standard of how you operate has to be very raised for you to like compete. But you can view it in two ways. You can view it as I'm open to learning, or you can view it as this is extremely intimidating and shocking, and it's demanding too much of me to survive here. So it gives you that little like crossroads of how you handle your mindset. Yeah.
And I think when you're speaking about, because it's very difficult to get lost in like a large organization, because I mean, essentially, not to put it badly, but you're like a cog in an already functioning wheel. You're just coming to take the place of someone who was already running that function. And I think it kind of speaks to impact, because like now you're working with Tap to Eat, and it seems to me like kind of a big change. Like you're moving from a Microsoft to Tap to Eat, where what the organization's vision is very socially and societally like impacted. The impact is there, So I'm just curious about what prompted that change. Did you actually make an intentional move to be like, okay, I'm moving from this large organization to somewhere where my work can be more meaningful, not just to the organization, but to communities as well, Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's just like different parts of what informed that move. Like, as I mentioned before, I just have this way of like working through my career, and a lot of it involves like transferable skills. I was exposed to so many resources and so many different places to position myself at Microsoft, and I realized that like I make every move you make on like a day to day kind of like unfolds to another possibility in that space, right? But I think I needed for me some time to like practice the skills I'd gotten there, right? So as much as I'm doing like all these courses, these mandatory courses that you actually have to do, that are written by all these PhD people, they're written by all these very accomplished academics, like it's hard to see how to use it on like a day to day. And so I felt like it would be a waste for me to be there for 5 years, get constantly hit with all this knowledge that I'm not going to ever be able to apply in my day to day settings. And that was one of the reasons why I felt like I needed to get my head out of the water. Another thing is like an industry secret that a lot of people know is that the best way to progress in some of those places is to leave and get experience in another organization and go back, right? Like you find people who have taken 4 or 5 years to go up the ladder in a specific role, and you find someone who did a 2-year stint, went and did 4 years in a startup and came back, goes into that position much faster. Like, of course, it's like a broken process. It's a broken system because these companies are investing a lot of money in growth, right? And so it should be more, let's hire more, let's make sure that our growth and development strategy is helping existing employees scale up in these roles much faster. But at the end of the day, it's also going to be how much you can learn in that setting while doing your small little role, right? And so that's how, like, I guess, like corporate competitiveness comes in, right? Because you really have to like claw your way to making your work seen, because there's so many of you, you have to really stand out. And sometimes it means kind of like sacrificing your mental health if it's not an environment that you're used to. But some people just naturally thrive in that environment. And so for me, food for education, kind of just starting to build up the tech team from scratch was just a way to like practice, okay, end to end. Yes, I am exposed to experiences of building an end-to-end product, but how, can I really do it? And like in practice, and also it's a whole different ball game when you don't have to worry about generating revenue. So all the products I'd worked with before was like our targets were revenue based. So we started this quarter with $100,000. Can we make it 150? So my thinking on product was more around how do I create product strategies that increase revenue. Food for education is different because there's no revenue involved. Like it's not about collecting money. It's not about like making sure that like we have more and more users. It's kind of like how do we like the challenge I was given when I came in is like how do we feed 150,000 students every day in an hour, like across the country. Yeah, so it was like how do we do that? How do we make that work? How do we make that work for like small villages in Kisumu that have limited internet? So build a product strategy around that. Resources are limited but not unlimited, right? Like they're not limited in the sense of like you have to have a budget, but like they're not unlimited. And the biggest resource you work with in that space is time, because every day that the product is not ready is every day that the children don't feed or the children don't have a terrible experience at lunchtime, miss food. So it kind of switches your perspective on like what product success looks like. It's not always going to be the number of users. It's not always going to be the amount of money the product is generating. It really switches it to the human aspect of like the impact that the product has. And just looking at the experience at Microsoft, it would be useful for product journeys to start from that perspective, right? Like, and we attempt to do it within product. Like when we're writing like user stories and we're like, as a developer, I would like to XYZ. That's a very shitty attempt at like thinking that that's human centric. It's not human centric. Human centric is really spending like a lot of time understanding the actual pain, like understanding that when I'm building a banking app and someone is not able to access their money, like this could be like a situation in a hospital. This could be a situation with a policeman. Like this could be like a life and death type situation. That's like human centric product management, where you really look at the end goal, which is zero downtime of my app, is actually going to affect like actual lives. And so the opportunity I've had at Food for Education has allowed me to like spend time like on the ground and really see a school before the program and a school after the program, and realize that like nutrition is like a key part, right? Like we go to certain schools and like you find that they have like a 50% of the children who join in class 1 don't finish class 8. And then the program is there for like 2 years, and you realize that that number is cut down by 30%, right? Which means that there's like a lot of people in our streets who've dropped out of school because it's just not sustainable, because they just didn't even have access to like food. They didn't even have the energy to go through the educational system. So there's just like a lot of those types of like personal, human-based type of interactions you have that actually end up affecting how you build the product. Yeah.
So I feel like those were pretty serious questions. But now from I'm more Monanchi. I'm not even in the tech space, nothing. I talk to a lot of PMs just to understand what's going on in the industry. But I just have to ask, in your opinion, this is literally like in your opinion, we've been seeing and hearing reports of like, okay, Microsoft has let people go, Sandy has let people go, salaries of PMs and of developers are being like reduced and everything. I don't know, what's your opinion on that? Is that like the market correcting itself, or what? Just your initial thoughts, just off the top of your head.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it, like the scary part about being in tech is that we get so heavily impacted by hearsay, like gossip, like people, like we are very trend people, like in tech. So like no one ever wants to be left behind. That's why like something as simple as like, oh, Instagram has a dark mode. Everybody has to have a dark mode. Like sometimes we don't even think that dark mode is an accessibility issue. Like certain things like those types of like okay, they're doing it, let's do it too. I think there's an element of that within the tech layoffs. I feel like from my perspective, a lot of those layoffs within the big tech were not very planned way in advance. Even in terms of how they were executed, it kind of shows how rushed it was, right? Like folks saying they went for the weekend and they came back and their laptops were remotely switched off. Like that's hasty. That's not very like, oh, we gave people 6 months to find jobs, and it's been very hasty. And I think putting it in the context of like the economic times, the economic unsurety, it's one of those things where like, okay, Google is laying off 10,000 people. Should we lay off 10,000 people? Maybe we should lay off 10,000 people. Maybe we're paying 10,000 additional salaries that make us less profitable and less competitive for shareholders, right? So it's also good to like zoom out sometime from your day-to-day role and realize that at the end of the day, there's like a huge economic game that's going on, right? So as much as it's about people's livelihoods, it's about the revenue, the amounts of profits that we're talking about, it's you have to realize that it's like a shareholder game, and the companies will do what they need to do to make themselves as attractive and to keep their shareholders happy. So I think there's that, and I think yeah, like for some teams, like especially teams, maybe not on the company level, for some teams, it was a good opportunity to really sit down and see like, are our processes as lean as they could be, right? So are we having 10 PMs doing a 5 PM job, like 5 PM type job, right? So I think when that pressure to release that number of people comes, it forces the internal teams to also take a step back and say, all right, if it was about being this cutting down this team into half, how would we actually build our processes to make sure that that can happen and that the product keeps running? So when those types of crises happen, like the response in big tech is usually just realizing, oh, okay, we might have overhired a little, right? We might have like over granularized our processes to make space for more people, right? And I think that's what happened. I think it was more trend based, and I also think that I don't know how the criterias were, because like it was just so random. Like also just having friends who've been like laid off like that. It's like you are typically a high performer, and then now like let's not go down the rabbit hole of like how likability is like a thing that determines how people get laid off in those scenarios. Like it's scary. I try to not think about it. Like maybe like my manager just won't like me enough to spare me when the thing
when the time comes.
yeah, just my opinion on that.
So just kind of leaning into that a bit. Just from my perspective, again, as an outsider, whenever you hear how much devs or PMs are being paid, sometimes straight out of uni, you're just like, what, wait, may I have to work 10 years to get there? What is going on? You know, like just those kinds of things, like those kinds of situations.
Yeah.
But my question then would be, how do we attract devs and PMs to come from like the more corporate setting to more socially impactful ventures, because we know that tech is really good for communities and for the society, and we know that there are so many problems that we have as African communities that could be solved if a lot of our devs and PMs like just like applied to being like, okay, there's this problem, how could it be solved using technology and all those things. But of course we know that the large corporates are offering like a lot of money, a lot more stability, a lot of opportunities and resources. So have you thought around like how can we attract more of our like very talented devs to come into socially impactful ventures?
I think like with those types of questions, I try to not like reinvent the wheel much. Like I feel like there's so many communities on the developer side where like throwing an idea out as a hackathon can really stick and get like a lot of the manpower. So it's more of like, can community help community, right? So I know on the tech side, we can definitely do more to make sure that the types of hackathons, the type of social impact we're having is like a priority. When it comes to having full-time resources, it's like a whole different ballgame. I think that question doesn't really exist in like a bubble because there's so many different motivators, right? Especially in an African context, when you talk about social impact, the perception is charity. And social impact is not typically just like limited to like a charity type setting. Like even with us, there's definitely like at Food for Education, there's definitely avenues there. Like building a kitchen will take a couple of tens of millions of Kenya shillings. You can't remove that from social impact, right? For the program to run, somebody's gonna have to get 50 million Kenya shillings to build a kitchen, right? When you start making it more inclusive of the economic perspective, then it stops looking a little bit like charity. Because one question I've gotten asked a lot while interviewing devs is like, when we're borrowing money from, when we're asking for money from donors, are like budgets around like paying the tech team included in some of those budgets. So on the social impact side, it's important during planning and during fundraising to realize that, tech is an actual investment coming from the state where we don't have like a specified set of services for African citizens that are like government mandated. Like the government must provide free healthcare, free schooling, free school feeding. Like, so the lines are very blurry there. So when you're a social impact founder and you're looking for PMs, we probably wouldn't know whether is this a organization that has scope it can competitively pay a PM to deliver that service as a service and not as a charity? Or is this one of those settings where like people have walked around and identified a problem and we just don't know whether this is a problem the government should be solving, or is this a problem that tech and innovation should be solving outside of the government? I think like from when I joined tech, there's definitely been a lot more openness in government for techies to get in. Like it just wasn't like a thing where you would be like, oh, there's a developer role at Ministry of Lands. Like, I never saw an opening like that, right? But now you're starting to see like a lot more openness to them trying to bring in technological people and bring in technological strategy in terms of that delivery. I think that's going to be a huge step with how we start seeing more technological innovation in that space, right? So hopefully, like it's so dependent, right? I think the the social impact project I interfaced with while I was in developer relations, and even the one can actually compel PMs and engineers to try and participate in, right? Not to mention, like, yeah, the talent is very, it's expensive for sure, but like it's also been a factor of like how difficult it is to be able to acquire those skills over time. But we tend to hope that there is going to be some sort of evolution with that story, with how accessible it is now and how many developers and PMs are in the workspace, because I think a lot of the competitive salaries is also based off of like shortage, like just a supply demand type situation. Yeah, and also it's gonna be interesting to see how well some of like ChatGPT is writing some good Ruby code right now. I don't know like what does that does to Ruby people, but like we'll see whether that tips the scale of where tech is in terms of like being paid.
Yeah, trust me, don't get me wrong. Eat all their monies. All of them. Eat it. But now just talking about ChatGPT, and talking about, you mentioned blurred lines as well. I just wanted to ask, especially in the context of Dr. Geoffrey Hinton, the Google AI godfather kind of story that came out, the 75-year-old who quit Google, apparently because he didn't know how far AI was going to go. Just a question around that, like, before I get deep into AI, because we had some questions from the online audience about AI, but what are some of your ethical considerations, like when you're building a product that's going to have some sort of intervention? Are there like any ethical considerations you usually have before launching it and everything? Like, I know it's a pretty broad question, but just in your context of Tap to Eat at Food for Education, what are some of the things that you like to think about before you launch something? How will it affect the community? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, luckily for us, the space, like the school feeding program space, is pretty regulated, right? Like it's regulated on a food safety level, it's regulated on a what are you doing with the parent data level. The donors are also a huge stakeholder of how we do our processes, and they're one of the biggest advocates for things to remain ethical. But I think what's been very valuable for us in our organization is to make ethics kind of like a personal value everyone has to have, right? Like, we all kind of like cut corners, but we kind of have a way to think about how many corners we can possibly cut. And I think the regulation has gotten like a lot better. But for us, we are always trying to advocate when we're having conversations with government, when we're having conversations with donors. Can we remove? It's become almost impossible to remove ethical implications from financial implications. So we just try to make sure that, like in those rooms, voices are making that distinction known, right? Like, where we are mixing conversations about ethics and good practice with conversations around finances, and maybe those conversations should remain apart, and maybe they should be very distinct, so that we can stop making we can stop like making ethical decisions with financial considerations, because it kind of ends up nullifying itself in the grand scheme of things. So with everything around data, it's like out this amount of money to adhere to this data protection, or are we just going to do the best we can to secure the data, right? Like, but when you look at the higher ethical implication of that type of decision, it means that a loophole could mean that politicians have access to our customer base, or politicians start using a school feeding program as a campaigning tool. Is it ethical? Is it not ethical? So we just try to make sure that, like, during those conversations in those rooms, there's a balance there. But even in the big corporate side, those conversations still seem to be meshed together. And that's why sometimes we might just find a lot of those dramas for, like, that's very unethical. How would they ever do that? Yeah.
And just speaking about not necessarily an ethical, but we had an online question that literally it was directed to you in the sense of I've studied tech in school, but then just when I finish comes ChatGPT and AI and everything. So it's difficult for me to get excited about practicing my tech because I'm afraid that AI will take my job. So they were literally asking you, what are you excited about tech in 2023? And also if you have any advice for them, like in regard to ChatGPT and AI and working with AI rather than being so afraid of it going into the future of tech.
Right. Like, I don't have any particular opinions on like what the trends would be. Like, I feel like I don't usually spend a lot of time getting that type of like data and like analyzing it critically enough to say that. But I think in terms of like just surviving different types of like these types of evolution, I think it's tending to be more of like a mindset thing, right? Like, there's those of us who are on the side, which is like, maybe people would think this is the hippie side, where we're like, oh, the limitless possibilities of having cheaper services because a lot of these things are automated and human labor has been minimized and human intervention has been minimized. But then there's those of us who are like, oh my God, now doctors are gonna be replaced, pilots are gonna, it's an apocalypse, right? Like, it's a mindset thing. I think I'm on the hippie side of like, let's ride the wave and see how it can make it better for us on a day to day. And I think like I'm pretty excited by how much people are like even using AI in like their personal lives. I don't feel like there's been an adoption of like this type of tech to the level where it is, where it's like, I want to use it to write my emails. I want to use it to write, like, to learn more about like myself. I want to use it to journal. I want to use it to track my weight loss. I want to use it for all these things. So how democratized it is very exciting. It means that a small business owner somewhere can automate the entire order processes and implement like very complex strategies that would have taken them multiple iterations to come up with, and like that means more people get empowered, right? That means more business reach more people, like that means things get better, right? But I mean, of course, there's the other side of like, are we building and feeding these things in a way that doesn't have a safety implication? But we also have to acknowledge the role of like, media and movies in how we view some of these innovations, right? Like I remember watching a documentary a while ago where, like, what were the name of the brothers who did the planes? The Wright brothers, right? Like, like people were like, they're witches, they're wizards. And like, I feel like we constantly do that as humans. Like, something starts moving a little faster and we're like, it's witchcraft. It's the devil, right? And then something starts working a little bit differently and we freak out a little. I feel like right now it's also just a little bit too soon to get that extreme into, and at the end of the day, if you do have like a base career in tech, like it just means that you actually have a leg up on a society level to utilize those tools in an even better way, right? So there's still opportunities for developers, engineers, PMs to use them as tools. It's just more of like curiosity and opportunity cost weighing out where the most value is. I just read a tweet before I came here, and it was more of like how ChatGPT will replace PMs. And then the next tweet was like 15 amazing prompts on how to use ChatGPT as a PM. And I'm like, okay, so which one am I reading, right? Like it's gonna boil down to the mindset, right? Like it's gonna boil down to, do I wanna be terrified of this thing or do I wanna be curious about this thing, right? So I think that's the juncture where we're at. And I'm like on the peace and love vibe for let's be curious. But then if the apocalypse happens, don't nobody quote me. The bullet stop recording this thing. Roina said we should trust it. She said it's gonna be okay.
It's going to be used against you. So I think at that point, I'd just like to involve the audience. I don't know if you have any questions for Roina. Does anyone, any takers? Yes.
Hi guys.
Hey.
Roina, first of all, I've been following the organization for quite a while now. I'm interested to find out how you use AI with what you're doing for tap to the tap. So it's really interesting to understand how you actually would. Are you using AI currently right now?
No, currently no, but we are exploring avenues to use it to analyze a lot of the data that we are collecting, right? Like we are maybe one of the only organizations that currently exist that have a lot of information about like school going children, particularly between kindergarten and grade 8. Right? Because our program has been running for a while and we've collected a lot of data around their ages, their feeding patterns, their growth patterns, how they move schools, how they perform. So we have a lot of that data, but because it's so much of it and because the program has been growing so rapidly, we want to make sense of it and we want to make sure that we can reach the stakeholders that matter. So like is information around like how well children are progressing between grades more important to the Ministry of Education? Is it more important to organizations that are trying to offer scholarships for education? Like, so we have a ton of that data over the last 5-6 years. And so that's how we're planning on using AI, but currently it's not part of the Tap to Eat app. It's also because we have to facilitate things like donors, right? Like, what are their views on incorporating third-party services into our application? Yeah,
I think that's cool. Actually, just a comment because I mean AI is a new thing. I'm currently also like using it with my business right now, and I'd say go for it. I mean, we shouldn't be scared. I think we should implement it in our everyday lives.
Yeah.
So yeah, good stuff.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you, Roina, so much. I think it's great to hear your insights as well as get the big picture that you're painting for us, both of your life history as well as the career progression. That's really great. Thank you for that. So my question again is about the products for food for education and the acceptance that you probably, was there a process of acceptance that you had to go through for the children with, I think it's a wristband or a smartwatch, something like that. How did you get that to be incorporated into their culture of thinking, given that this is a very, very diverse, possibly age group, who are not often receiving a lot of technology targeted towards them, other than for fun and games. But this is quite a serious piece of tech that you have, which is assisting them to really feed well. So I'm curious about that. And in general, maybe the bigger question as I wind up, that mindset of getting Kenyans to start to accept innovations that come locally and our own ideas, which can be quite groundbreaking, like what you guys have experienced in terms of attracting international attention, funding, and that kind of thing. So it's a twofold question. I hope I'm clear. I sound weird to myself on this mic, so if I'm not talking well. But thanks again, and those are good questions. I can hand the mic to whoever's next.
Right. I think that's a great question. I can say a little bit more about how the Tap to Eat app works in context. So we are like our organization is very based off of gathering stakeholders and subsidizing meals, right? So currently, if you are to get a meal that has around 100 grams of beans and maybe 150 grams of rice, the base value of how much that meal would cost would be approximately level of doubt in people. People are constantly, anything to do with money, folks are very aware that, if this person takes 15 shillings from 100 of us, that's going to be 1,500. Well, if they do 1,000, if they do 10,000, what is the scam? And a lot of, when I go to the field, a lot of the questions I have is what's the catch? That's a lot of food for 15 bob. Is the beans rotten or something? What's the catch? So you have to kind of preempt that doubt. You have to, while you're training the team that's going out there to talk to these people, you have to make them understand that the rejection is, we actually expect the rejection. We also have to understand that there's a social political climate, and it's a very intense one. And if you're in Nairobi particularly, or if you're in the lower middle class going up, you're very abstracted to how intense the political situation is, right? So we typically have to engage different parties, different political parties, to have a cohesive narrative. So some of our meetings at Food for Education are where opposition and other people actually meet. So we make sure that this isn't something that's being pegged as a government contract. This isn't something that's pegged as KJ is the one who's bringing the food. No, you have to bring in all the different parties, because often we remove that political affiliations affect the adoptability of a product. We have some roundtables with even people from Safaricom where just the narrative of one of our opposition leaders saying that Safaricom is for this party. That has significantly affected the uptake of new products from that company. So you have to kind of act as an aggregator on a community level so that everybody feels included in the narrative. The unfortunate part about that, or the fortunate part about it, depending on how you see it, that it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of actual manpower, people on the ground to do it. But on the other side, we're happy to do it because it's creating opportunities for members of the community to be employed by us, and it's creating opportunity for us to interact with those stakeholders one-on-one. And when you take the testimonials, even if folks say that even if we were to bring the cost of a meal to 50 shillings, it would still be probably the cheapest balanced meal you can get in some of these areas. So even just the remoteness of those areas, it being a basic need has been a huge propagator and a huge promoter of the adoption of the program. And the thing is, it's also not a one-shot thing. Like once they've agreed for the program, like you have to regularly, and it's something that they're pleasantly usually surprised about. Like when you come back after 3 months, when you come back after a year and ask them, do you guys like the food? And then when they realize you've been there for 2 years, they're like, whoa, we've actually never even had healthcare programs that are that sustainable. So I think anybody who's trying to build products in the social impact space needs to kind of like understand all of those moving parts, and also needs to understand that like the more people who are building unsustainable social impact projects, it's doing a lot of damage to the ones that can actually like make a change. So everybody is like, I think I want to start an NGO. If you've really not like thought it all the way out, you reach 10 students, and it's definitely having an impact. Like even like the sanitary towel drive, like right now, we need more consistency in that space. We need folks who can carry out programs for a longer period of time. And I think that's where the gap within the impact space is right now, the consistency.
Thank you for those. Thank you for those really insightful questions. It's great to hear you guys had some curiosity on Tap to Eat and Food for Education specifically.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a really interesting project that Roina has been working on. Any other final question before we call it a day?
Hi.
Hello.
Yes, hi. So, wow.
What's the rule?
Okay, now I think it's okay. So maybe just 3 questions. Number 1 is, how do you not get complacent? Okay, number 1. Number 2, how do you stay away from the competition? How do you preserve your role in what you do? Because there are many tech guys in that space. How do you set yourself apart, basically? And the third thing is, how do you scale this project to the family level, given that you have the children eating, right? But then at home you have the parents who maybe they're not eating. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Welcome.
How to not be complacent? Honestly, like I'm so complacent on so many other things. It's just the career side, but like I think one thing that's been really useful, which is something I've mentioned like during this whole entire time, like your journey has to be like so personal to you. Like these things that these just like social cause that are make it a little bit difficult to make your journey very personal to you, which is the perspective that there is a work you and there's a home you and there's a like that you are 3 different parts, right? Like that there's a professional you, then there's you with friends, and then there's you with these types of people. That makes it like extremely hard for you to make sure that like your career is a part of like your entire personal journey. So you might be making a lot of strides in terms of like your spirituality and your finances, but like you're not making that amount of strides within like your career, and that makes it really difficult to compare. Like it makes it difficult to consolidate your efforts, right? When you personalize your career journey, which is like something I don't know, someone told me like I guess during our DevRel days, is that like the ultimate journey of it working out with you being aggressive with your career is like owning being totally authentic, which means that the least amount of energy you can use being somebody else in the workplace could be your competitive edge. Like if you don't have to switch up to talk to to talk to people in a different way, if you don't have to switch up to present differently, if you don't have to switch up to be a whole different person at work, you can save so much energy that you can really use to totally come through for yourself in the role. The truth of the matter is we have these expectations that the companies will create this amazing environment for us to thrive, right? So they'll balance our mental health, they'll balance the number of meetings we'll have, they'll facilitate that we need to log out at 5, but like that's a personal responsibility. Once you own that your mental health affects how you are to your family, affects how you are to your friends, affects how you show up at work, you make that a priority, because it's not about like, it only affects me at work. It's a you thing. It's a 100% a you as a human type thing, right? So that's just like one of the biggest things that I've realized. Like the people who present 100% authentically sometimes come off as the assholes. You can present authentically without being an asshole, but they come out as the assholes. They come out as they're so checked out. Like, but you really realize that they've owned the entire process. And when you own the entire process, you know when to step back from conversations. You know how to be like, all right, like I'm expecting myself to go and read a couple of things at home for ChatGPT. Do I really need to use 300 tokens of my energy right now arguing with this person in this meeting? When you own it like that, then it's pretty easy to just be like, all right, let's do it your way. Let me support you. Let me listen. Let me learn from you. But when you just have it at that concept of like, okay, here are the qualities I'm supposed to embody as an employee, and here are the qualities I'm supposed to embody as a husband, and here are the qualities I'm supposed to embody, like it's just too much. It's overstimulating. And personalizing that journey just means that like I gain satisfaction from my career development, but I also gain satisfaction from how that journey affects me as a person. So for me, I love that my journey as a PM has made me an amazing communicator, which means that the people who date me love it because I communicate so concisely, which is like when I look at a role, when I look at even the next job I'm going, I look for a culture that allows me to communicate with my style, because I've seen that that is 100% beneficial in my personal life and in my growth. So it stops becoming more about like, oh, I'm going to need to look for a more senior position. It's like, I'm going to walk into this interview. I'm going to see how the power play is here. I'm going to see how they receive criticism, and I'm going to know whether that's my communication style, because that's not something I'm willing to compromise on. So you switch on, like, it's not even just like a litmus test. It's now like, hey, you're giving me a 3-point interview, but I have a 3-point interview with you too, right? So that's how you keep yourself on the game. And when an environment starts making it hard for you to be yourself, and it start making it hard for you to find the things that enrich your journey, that's how it becomes very easy to know when to leave. Like people are like, when did you know to leave at that point? It was just like, it just got too awkward for me. Like it was just too much showing up every day. And it's not really a feeling thing. It's more of like, all right, I know what I need for this journey. Like I've identified my weaknesses, and I know that I came to this role to build up on this weakness. I'm not building up on it because the environment is not allowing that. So I'm going to go and find somewhere else, right? And you accumulate now skills, and you accumulate depth. And that can be applied like literally anywhere. So whether you even decide that, okay, I'm quitting now, I'm quitting tech, I'm just going to be we've said farmer too many times, I'm going to be a fisherman. Like your growth mindset will allow you to be a good damn fisherman. Like you will have accumulated the ability to learn, you'll have accumulated the ability to dispute, to resolve conflict, to communicate well, which means that you're going to make a good fisherman. You're going to be like a very well communicated fisherman. You're going to be a very well curious fisherman, right? So it's more about like the whole journey compared to like, this is my journey in tech, or this is my journey in product. What was the second lesson again?
Yeah, just to, because I think you took on the first two.
Yeah.
So now the last one, on that motivational note, the last one was, he was asking that you've worked on how to feed the kids, and now it's more about like the families that they go home to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've also tried to I've tried to read very recently a lot about like the evolution of like the African family structure, and it's quite interesting. Like I don't know if anyone has any recommendations of books that just zone in on that, but like you get a few snippets while you're looking at like history of like African politics and that type of thing. And the book I'm currently reading, I think, what is it called? I don't remember, but I don't remember the name of the book itself. But like the author was just saying like how it's very interesting that the core of a lot of like African economics, African conflict is very based on the African family structure. And I think for us as food for education, we see it like full hand. We see it firsthand when it comes to like when we're sending even like reminders to parents. So like when we're telling a parent like, hey, you only have 50 bob left, this can only have like 3 meals for your child, top up. It's as easy as sometimes you have to send it to like we have to choose who to send the message to because one of the numbers is not reachable. We'll send it to the mom. Like it's literally down to a science like that. Like when we analyze our payments data, almost 87% of payments come from women. Like so when we're talking about like who is really the biggest stakeholder of well-being in the households, people will say that on a financial level it could be the males. People will say like on a making it a home level, it could be the females, but there's a lot to say with just the payments. So what we do in that perspective, we've known a majority of our payments come from women. What we do is we give that data to organizations like WWFP. WWFP is really interesting because it really wants to empower women to be providers of their homes, right? So that's all we can do. Like we know that it's a huge problem. It's a psychology, it's a gender roles problem, it's a huge problem. But what you can do is give the data to the people who are actually obsessed with very distinct problems in the bigger problem and hope that they can action it in a different way. But like we knew that like we had to choose a struggle from the beginning, and the struggle of making African homes safe and functional enough is just too big of a struggle for us, because when you go into feeding, then you have to look at like safety. And when you look at safety, it's more of like, all right, like what is the dynamic that's causing a home to be unsafe, right? Because some children don't eat at home, not because there's no food at home, it's just because that environment does not allow, like these are children who just don't want to go home, right? Like that environment is just too bad. So we realize like, well, that's way above us. But what we can do is we can work very closely with organizations that are trying to solve those problems and give them what we are learning and share notes with them. Yeah.
So that's been a really insightful conversation, Roina. I think I've learned more than I thought I would. I thought I was just going to moderate, but today I was no, for real. But in respect of your time and the time of our gracious audience, I think we'll bring it to a close. Thank you all for attending Anajali's first event. Shout out to Sumaya. We hope that if we call you for more events, that you will still turn up. Sorry for starting past time, but thank you for bearing with us, and have a good night. You may leave at your leisure. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.